That is always my cue to start these sessions. So welcome to today's echo session. We're thrilled to be starting this Time to Act mental health across the lifespan. We are recording today's session. We use that for education and quality improvement purposes. It will be stored on our Canvas page that you will all get access to after today's session, as well as on our webpage that links to our YouTube channel. So please feel free to go back and review those as often as you want. Echo is a really interactive community, so please take a minute and turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable. It helps not only us get to know each other, but it also helps our presenters see who's on the call. As you can see, all of our amazing hub members have an asterisk behind them, as well as the Echo background. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to any of our hub team members. You can ask questions in the chat. Echo is really a way to just share all of our knowledge and learn from each other. We do have a portion of a case narrative, so that's a great way to solidify any information. We will probably be reaching out and see if anybody is interested in sharing a case. It's a great way to learn from each other, as well as get valuable resources and recommendations. We do ask that if we are talking about families or clients, that we protect their individual privacy. So avoid using identifiable markers like first, middle, last names, where they live, their name, address, social security number, mother's last name, all of that stuff. Stay away from using that. If you have any questions, again, reach out to one of our hub team members and they'll be glad to help you out with that. If you've never attended an Echo session before, welcome to your first one. They're a great way to learn and continue to build that community of practice. So we will always have a didactic speaker as well as a case presentation. And then we go into small breakout groups where we'll talk about the case. Again, it's really to build that professional networking and community of practice. So being able to share our ideas. We don't know everything, and it's always wonderful to hear from, say, Heather, what she has on the topic, or JC, what he can share. So being sure that we just share that knowledge with each other. Renaming and raising your hand. We probably all have been on Zoom so often anymore that we know how to do that, but in case we don't, here are some ways to rename your profile, as well as how to raise your hand. Kurt will monitor the chat for us. So if you have any questions in the chat for our didactic speaker, he will answer. He'll make sure those get answered, as well as you can just raise your hand. If you want to pre-register for any of our sessions, you can reach out to timetoact@aggies.usu.edu. We do give out credit for attendance or a certificate for attendance, and that is after you fill out the survey. So we will be dropping today's survey link throughout today's session, as well as sending it out after the session. We, like I mentioned, have a Canvas page. The Canvas page is where we store all of our information, PowerPoints, presentations, the recording, all of the recommendations that are gathered in the breakout groups will be stored on our Canvas page. And you can always ask for that by emailing timetoact@aggies.usu.edu. Again, case studies. Great way to, if you have a case or a family, a client, anybody that you're working with that you just want some recommendations and feedback, please consider submitting a case narrative, case discussion. I know it's sometimes scary to present, but it's a great way to get valuable information. We do have social media, so Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, that we share resources on. We share about all of our sessions. So if you want to take a minute and follow us on one of those, that would be amazing. I am really excited today to introduce Sondra, and she's going to share with us a wealth of information around infant mental health. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn the time over to her.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to go ahead and get my slides pulled up here just a second. As mentioned, I'm Sondra Stegenga. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Utah, but I'm actually a longtime provider and administrator in the fields of early intervention, early childhood education, and education in general. I've worked in hospitals, schools, and been a home visitor actually since I was 18 in a range of different settings. And so this work is very near and dear to my heart. But just as was mentioned in the beginning of this, I highly value all of the expertise that I know is in this room already and look forward to our conversations together. So don't hesitate to put things in the chat to really be involved as I go through this information, or if there's questions that come up, please stop me. So huge welcome. I know that we all have so much going on in our days and our lives, and it takes time to be able to be here together. And I really appreciate your presence, because the more that we can learn together and problem solve, the better our outcomes are going to be for our communities. And so your time is appreciated today, spending it with me. So before I get going too far, I always like to ask the group, who are you? Where are you located? And then what's your role related to the topic today? And what brought you here today? If you wouldn't mind sharing, I'd just like to pause for a moment. And if you could put some of those things in the chat. And the reason I like to know this is just because it really helps me as I'm thinking about my examples, as I go through the presentation. And it also helps us all to connect a little bit as we're thinking about this work. I actually have practiced in several different states as an occupational therapist, as well as been on different state boards. And I know how different our rules, regulations, and even what's available in the different states. And so that's where, again, this really helps me to kind of understand where we're coming from today as we're getting together. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing some of this information. Great, looking like people are in a range of different places in Utah, I'm seeing. A lot of different roles, wonderful. Such great expertise that we have in the room here across a range of different systems. And I'm seeing a lot of fellow early interventionists, which is great. Wonderful. And seeing some familiar names and positions. So it's good to see a lot of you here today. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I think it's great for us all to see each other as well, so that hopefully after the session, we can continue sharing with each other, knowing that we're in similar lines of work and interests. Okay, so today, some of the things that I want to be going through are, what is infant mental health? Often there can be some confusion about what this actually is. And then why does it matter? I also want to go through some possible signs, some current research, how that links to education and life, and then what can we do? There are some pretty simple things that we can actually do to get started. And then I also want to make mention of some different opportunities and resources for you all. So infant mental health really is about the developing capacity of children birth to age 6 to experience, regulate, and express emotions. It also involves forming close relationships with caregivers and ultimately being able to explore the environment and learn. And this all happens in the context of family, community, and cultural expectations for the young. You may also hear infant and early childhood mental health. That also is starting to be kind of a term that's used, just because some people view infant as being, the first year of life, but really with infant mental health, we really are thinking about that age birth to 5 or 6, depending on how it's defined in your particular state. And what really sets this off and is a little bit different than some other practices or services is that it really is centered in a relational framework of the caregiver and child. So what this means is that any assessment, any intervention, everything occurs within that relationship of that dyad, that parent and child. So we're not coming in and looking just at the child. It really is about those early relationships, because that's where all of that early development happens. So this relationship really is the primary focus of this work and of infant mental health. It also is very strengths-based. We want to be coming in and building off of the family strengths and really promoting those. And it's also prevention oriented. So it's not just children who maybe have experienced abuse or neglect. There may be many reasons why there might be a need for supporting these responsive interactions. And I'll talk through that quite a bit more today. Also, infant mental health is an interdisciplinary field. So it includes providers from health, mental health, education, early intervention, and there are many policy professions that are focused on this as well, just because it's so foundational to all early development. And so it's a really neat space to be. And for those of us who are already, it looks like, in interdisciplinary fields, I think this will really resonate with your work. So why does this matter? It's foundational to all development and learning. If we don't have these early relationships, we're not going to have that early language development. We're not going to have the child wanting or willing to be able to explore their environment as much. And so that really can hinder that early development in all areas. And so we need to promote these relationships and this infant mental health to ensure that they are able to be where they need to be and ready for school later in life. Also, trauma is intergenerational. So meaning that the experiences that families and caregivers and parents have had in the past often can get passed down to the children. And so we want to make sure that we're caring for both the child and the parent in these relationships. Also, we can experience difficulties due to prematurity and medical trauma. We really need to be thinking about how that impacts those early relationships, especially when you think about being in a hospital environment. The child may be impeded from being able to interact with their caregiver in ways that we typically would think about doing, because they may have medical equipment on, or because they may be getting certain treatments. And so there are a lot of ways that these relationships can be disrupted in our environments that we might not think about, because we're so focused on the immediacy of those health needs. Also, we know that the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act has mandated referrals to other systems. And so within our systems, we have children who may have these mental health needs, as well as some of these family relationship needs. We also are seeing increasing rates of adult mental health, particularly as we went through COVID. And then these health needs ultimately impact interactions. If a parent or caregiver has depression, for example, they may be missing cues from a child. And so we need to be thinking about how this bigger picture really impacts these relationships. And ultimately, we have this urgent need. Between 14 and 20% of children ages 0 to 6 nationally and internationally have mental health or behavioral needs. And we're hearing this all over. We're hearing about this in our early intervention systems, in our educational systems, in our preschools. And we really need to be thoughtful about how on all levels we can be supporting these early relationships. So again, too, beyond even all that reasoning, holding these practices and making sure that we're promoting these good relationships and early responsive interactions is actually part of our ethical charge as professionals. So through a lot of our professional organizations in early childhood, we actually have standards that talk about promoting these responsive interactions in young children and caregivers. And also in our early intervention system, so in Utah, it's Baby Watch, and other states, it may be called something different, but it's that Part C early intervention. The majority of the states actually have an added focus on social emotional development, which again, is very intertwined with this infant mental health. We need to have those early relationships to develop those strong social emotional skills. So some possible signs of infant and early childhood mental health needs could be any of these. Often what it may manifest in, especially if it's an infant, is some of these physiological stress-related needs. So like poor sleeping patterns, difficulties eating or feeding, unremitting crying, restlessness, anxiety and tension, things like that. There can be a lot of different ones. And again, this isn't necessarily easy to tease out because these also could be other health related needs. But it's just something for us to be thinking about, that if we're seeing these behaviors and maybe there isn't a particular medical need that's been identified, is there something else that potentially could be going on that may be disrupting these early relationships where we might need to give a little bit more care to that, or coaching or support. Some signs of really good skills and early mental health skills in infant and early childhood are understanding one's own emotional states. So being able to have some of those young children be able to identify what those are. And that's true for all of us. Often it's harder for us to regulate when we can't identify what we're actually feeling. Also, reading and understanding emotional states in others, being able to empathize, being able to understand what's happening to other people around us. We start to be able to actually do that at very young ages. Also, we need to be able to manage strong emotions and express these in constructive manners. And so part of this links back to that original of being able to understand and identify our own emotional states. And then being able to regulate one's own behavior, developing that empathy, and then establishing and maintaining relationships. And so often when I hear there are behaviors in some early childhood environments, often my first reaction is kind of coming back to how, what is happening? Is there something related to this mental health and some of these early relationships that maybe we could be better supporting so that the child can better develop some of these regulatory skills? Some potential causes. I think perhaps the most known to all of us here in our early childhood fields or health fields are, of course, maltreatment, trauma, and toxic stress. In the US, more than 4 children die from abuse and neglect daily. And 70% of these children are actually under age 3. And 2.9 million cases of child abuse are reported each year. And 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused by the time they're 18. And children who are abused are 59% more likely to be arrested as a juvenile, 28% more likely as an adult, and 30% more likely to commit violent crime. So again, this is heartbreaking to hear, but it just really emphasizes how critical, absolutely critical, this early work is. We also know that children with disabilities are more likely to experience abuse and neglect. There's been a lot more research on this recently. And so it's very important that we're thinking not just within our typical box, if we're working with individuals with disabilities, about our supports, maybe for education and things like that, but we need to be thinking more broadly about underlying safety needs as well as mental health. Children who experience abuse and neglect are referred to Part C early intervention programs. And this has been one huge area of need over the years because a lot of providers have said historically they didn't feel prepared to be able to support families as well as they could. And this is where it's been so exciting to see many states really scaling up these infant mental health programs and certifications. And we're seeing a lot more early intervention providers getting this added certification of mental health so that they have some of these skills for better supporting families. Children also who've experienced maltreatment are more likely to experience a disability in their life. So it really goes both ways. And that's why we have those mandatory referrals from CAPTA. Also, we know that they typically have poor lifetime outcomes. And so this is why our Division for Early Childhood through the Council for Exceptional Children has actually come out with a position statement on child maltreatment, because these are so interlinked. So just being aware that there are a lot of actually different definitions of abuse and maltreatment. And we really need to be thinking through all of the different ways that potentially our young children could be impacted, and then making sure that we're responding and supporting those needs. We also could have things like medical neglect, where there's the withholding of life-sustaining treatment or nutrition. And so again, thinking more broadly than we may have typically thought about, when it comes to some of this abuse and neglect, and making sure that we're really supporting those families. Having been a Part C provider, early intervention for a lot of years, I did see a lot of families get lost between being in the system with CAPTA and then getting referred for early intervention. And we really need to make sure that we're improving our connections between those two systems so that the young children and families who've been identified can receive the additional supports through early intervention. Also, there's multiple different types of trauma that a child or a family may experience. And even we're seeing some of this with a lot of our natural disasters. And so thinking about what families have been through when they've been displaced, when they've maybe witnessed different types of trauma in their environments. We've had a lot of wildfires, things like that. And so thinking broadly about our communities and how some of the children and families may have been impacted by that beyond our traditional sense of abuse and neglect. And especially with this post-traumatic stress disorder, we may be seeing some of that due to the environmental ramifications that we've had with some of those natural disasters. So the next piece is stress. Often we think of stress as being a negative, but actually we can have some positive stress, again, if it happens within these supported early relationships. So positive stress would be brief and mild, where the caregiver is able to help the child cope with the stressor, and that's where they start to really learn. But again, that caregiver needs to be in a good space to really be able to help regulate that child as well during these positive stress interruptions. And so it could be something like dealing with frustration, maybe not getting something that they wanted, getting an immunization, and then immediately receiving that care from that caregiver. But then we also have some of these other levels where tolerable, where maybe we can get through. It doesn't necessarily cause long-lasting harm, but it really is not a positive form of stress. And then we have toxic, where it's very strong and unrelieved activation of the body's stress management system. And then the other piece of that is where we have the absence of a protective adult support. So again, this is where it's so important to make sure that as a caregiver, we're really recognizing where we might have these little bouts of stress and making sure that we're helping the child to really learn how to regulate that. And so I'm going to play a quick video here.
Sondra, I'm not hearing it.
Okay.
Healthy development. When experienced,
It's just really quiet, I guess.
Really quiet? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I might be able to fix that a second. I'll try one more time, and if it's too quiet, let me know, and I can always just skip it and give you the link for later, but we'll see.
That's better.
learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
And so, again, why it's so critical that we have those early relationships, because as I was mentioning, there are all these different forms of stress around us in our communities, in our homes. And if we have these early relationships, if we address this infant and early childhood mental health and support them as they go through these stressful situations, we will be able to mitigate and not let this stress turn into toxic stress. And why that's so important is because we know that it impacts, again, so many different areas of development. We can actually impact that brain architecture if we have this toxic stress. It impacts our learning and ability to concentrate. It often may manifest as behaviors. And as I said, we're continuing to hear more and more about high levels of behavior in our childcare settings, in our early childhood preschool settings, as well as when kids are arriving at kindergarten. And it all really comes back to this infant and early childhood mental health and these early relationships that we have. So why does it impact so many areas? Well, what ends up happening is we have these stress hormones that get released. And we end up having these inflammatory responses. And so we have breathing rates increasing, pupils are dilating. And when you think about young children, even trying to copy from a board, trying to follow along, if your pupils are dilated and they're out in this fight or flight type of posture, it makes it a lot harder to be able to concentrate, to read, to even follow along on lines. And so again, we want to make sure that children don't get stuck in this stress response from a very early age. And if we can help them to learn to regulate within these early relationships, they're going to better be able to do that throughout all of their environments. Because when you think about it, we go from this very supported infant time and services that maybe are in early intervention, and we have the supports of the child and family, and then they start to go off to school or to be in childcare and to be in these different environments. They need to be able to really have that security of being able to self-regulate and move past some of this stress. And so we want to make sure that we don't get into that toxic stress, because we actually can see changes in the brain. We can have the loss of neurons and connections if we don't address this right away. So again, truly, the sooner the better. And that's where I'm so excited to see a range of people here from our early intervention systems, from a lot of these early settings, because the care and the work that we do to support families at this youngest of age really can help us to nurture the brain, to nurture the bodies, to make sure that we're creating a good and safe system for the child so that they're set up for life, for success. And so again, as I was mentioning, it really can impact learning. And learning, when I mention that, that's early play, that's early development, all the way on to what we would consider more of those traditional school skills. And often this can display as difficulty with attention, difficulty having interactions and relationships, difficulty engaging in routines. And I encourage everyone to kind of step back and question, when you start to see some of those difficulties, could this be related to this infant and early childhood mental health? And how can we really help to support these secure, responsive early interactions for the young child? And so I just want to get you reflecting, just for a second, thinking about your own self. Have you ever tried to learn or pay attention when you were worried, stressed, or concerned about your safety? And then how did it go trying to pay attention? Were you really able to take in what you were hearing? No, I know for myself, absolutely not. When I've had some of those stressful interactions, those stressful times, I absolutely can't take things in. And often we'll hear this in early childhood or educational environments where somebody saying the young child just can't pay attention. They just don't sit still. They just, can't take this in. And so immediately I always want to think about, and it can be due to a range of needs, but I encourage everyone to think more broadly. Could there be something going on with their safety, with their security, with some of those early interactions and relationships that we want to make sure that we're supporting, and really be thinking about how that may be playing into their ability to participate and attend and actually be present for some of those important engagements and education and learning. So some other possible causes of infant and early childhood mental health needs. I mentioned earlier briefly about medical trauma, but I think that this is one that we really don't talk about enough, especially as our rates of premature birth have gone up, and in terms of their survival. We have a lot of children who have experienced these medical systems, as well as families who have gone through this. And what we're finding in the research is that can have longer lasting effects, like the post-traumatic stress disorder. And we are finding too that some of these early relationships can really be disrupted. And I give our medical system so much credit. I have worked in them myself in inpatient rehabilitation as an occupational therapist. And those healthcare supports are so needed, and it's providing new ways of life for young children. But at the same time, we also need to acknowledge that it's very hard. A parent often cannot hold their child in the way that they might if they were able to come right home from the hospital. If you're having to work around a lot of different equipment and supports and things like that, you might not be able to do some of those early interactions quite as well, or the cues of the child might even look different. Because if you think about if a young child has per se like a breathing tube or something in, they're not going to be able to engage in or maybe reach out in the same way to try to engage their parent. And this is where, again, we want to be thinking thoughtfully about that and making sure that the child who maybe has those medical needs or is experiencing that is still getting the same number of opportunities to engage with their parent. It might just need to look a little bit different or have some different supports. We also have some disruptions in parent-child relationships at times where a parent may be needing to work 2 jobs, or they may be called away for military duty. Also, there might be parental mental health needs that could be impacting those early relationships. So we think about that these early interactions really need to help and occur consistently over time. And there are things in lives that parents can't control that may end up impacting this. And that's where we need to be even more attuned and even more attentive to make sure that the young child is still receiving the number of opportunities to have those interactions with the parent, but maybe just in different ways, different settings, and amidst all of their caregivers. Also, we've talked about how parental trauma could impact the relationship. So again, some parents may have only experienced less than optimal interactions themselves, and then may need new teaching, new coaching, things like that to really learn about these early responsive interactions. And that's where the strengths-based approach for infant mental health is so critical. I'll never forget when a parent had said to me for the first time, she said, "You're the first person who's ever told me I've done something right." And that's something I never want to hear again. I hope that every parent gets to hear the things that they're doing right. And so think about that as you're going out. We do need to make sure that we're teaching, that we're helping to move practices forward, but at the same time, helping to reinforce parents who themselves are often trying to do the best that they very can in our life and our community. So amidst that, many parents in the foster care system have actually been abused themselves in the past. And so they might lack that training or support in parenting skills. And so this is where these early services really come and are so highly valuable so that we can surround and support these early interactions of both the child and the parent. And we really need to support families and caregivers more, especially when I think of some of our early childhood systems and some of the separations that we might have if a child has been removed from the home and they're working on reunification. We as providers need to make sure that we are working with that parent that is going through that reunification process and not just in foster care. Because we want to make sure, again, that we're helping to support and surround these early relationships. So the position statement on child maltreatment actually says we need to be advocates for supporting young children who've experienced this. We also need to be respectful and responsive to families. We really need to be thinking about the caregiver in all of this, because that's how we're going to end up improving these early skills. We should be aware of our own personal biases and how that might impact, because each of our families are different. Our upbringings are different. Our backgrounds are different. And we want to make sure that we're coming in and supporting the family where they're at. And then being responsive to unique family circumstances. And so there might be transitions going on. Like I mentioned, parents might be working multiple jobs. We really want to be thoughtful about that as we're working with the families. I also just want to mention there's so many great resources and training here in Utah. And so within this presentation, I have some links that you can go back if you want to explore more resources. And there's even referral links for free parents as teachers supports and things like that that we can get in our communities. So what else can we be doing? You know, thinking when we're in these different environments, whether it be home environments or whether we're in early childhood classroom environments or if we're in community health environments, there's actually a lot that we can do. We want to make sure that we're always taking a trauma-informed approach to our work, which means we realize and know the effects of trauma, like I was talking about, being able to recognize some of those signs and not just say, oh, this child has trouble with paying attention. Could there be something else going on? Do we really know and understand what that could be and how to support those needs? And we want to resist re-traumatization of the child. So for example, if they've experienced neglect, we want to make sure that we're not just ignoring behaviors, because that could end up re-traumatizing. So again, we want to make sure that we're really thoughtful about the backgrounds and the needs of all the children and families that we're working with. We want to make sure that we have interdisciplinary teams that include mental health staff. And this sounds simple, but for a long time, we have not had enough mental health professionals on our early intervention teams, on our school teams. We're starting to really see some scale up of that. And that's where I do give Utah a lot of credit too, is that, you know, we're having some good initiatives and supports to try to scale up a lot of these mental health supports across the range of systems, but be an advocate for that. We always need more. And then also, getting cross-trained yourself, you know, considering getting that infant mental health certification here in the state of Utah. Also focusing on routines that really can help to create safety and security. And then having opportunities for group and individual therapy and helping to connect families with that if needed in our communities. And then having parenting supports. And again, many states have different types of supports. As I mentioned, we even have some parents as teachers, as well as the infant mental health providers throughout the state. We also want to make sure that we actually have program or school-wide policies that integrate trauma information and curriculum. We want to make sure that this is not something that only happens once in a while, or if we identify a need. We really want to make sure that we're supporting this early development and these early relationships so that it's consistent for all the children. Because like I said, there's a range of different needs of why we may need some of these additional supports. And then consider engaging in research efforts to help understand the effectiveness of new trauma-informed interventions and relationship-based approaches to development. And then we want to make sure that we provide our interventions early because of the potential lifetime impact, like I've talked about. That's where our early services are so critical. That's where it's really important that all of us as providers in these early settings and working with young children and families, that we really know and understand this background, these signs, and how to connect families so that we can continue to support them in these relationships. It really helps to set that stage for a lifetime of positive interactions. Those of us who are going in and working with families in these youngest of ages, we may be the first touch that they've had. Like I said, this might be the first time that a parent is really receiving the types of supports they need to be able to answer questions about parenting, to be able to understand those early cues of their child. And on a whole, We just need to make sure that we're creating supportive, consistent, and secure relationships in all that we do. And this really involves making sure that we're supporting those relationships between parents and children. We don't want to take over for that relationship. We want to make sure that we're supporting them. Something else you can do, I highly encourage you to check out the Utah Association for Infant Mental Health. And if you're not from Utah, we actually are continuing to scale up this infant mental health certification throughout the US, and more states are starting to have infant mental health certifications, and I encourage you to check that out. You also can, of course, just continue on in different types of professional development if your state does not have this. But it's a wonderful way to find a community who's focused on similar efforts, as well as to really start to understand how we do this, how we screen, how we make sure that we're supporting families and young children to optimize our outcomes. Also, you could just consider, doing professional development like you're doing today and finding these wonderful communities of practice to continue to problem solve and make sure that we have the support for early development. And then I want to just play a brief example here. And this is one way to promote responsive interactions. And one thing that I really like about this with Serve and Return is it really helps us to think about not just us as an adult promoting an interaction with a child, but how critically important it is for us to notice their cues first, their serve that they might put out there, trying to get attention, trying to start an interaction, because that's really foundational to their self-efficacy, to their self-determination. And it's a way for us to really start to build those back and forth engagements and responsive interactions. And especially in our environments these days where we have phones in front of us all the time, I find we're missing some of these initial serves. And so I want you to check out this video here a minute to kind of see what this might look like.
Did you know that you can help build a child's brain? Everyday interactions can have a big impact on developing brains throughout childhood, starting even before babies can talk.
Scientists call this serve and return. Like a game of tennis or ping pong, a child serves by showing an interest in something, and the adult responds in a supportive way.
Finding moments throughout the day to do it is easy and fun, and you'll be building strong brains. You can use 5 steps to practice serve and return with any child. Step 1, share the focus.
When a child is interested or curious, you can see it. What's this? It's a stroller.
Watch this child look at something in a book. Right there. Pointing shows interest.
Wow.
So does making a sound, like this child. And mom is paying close attention.
See baby moving those little arms and legs and focusing on the ball? That's a serve.
The key is paying attention to what the child is noticing.
Oh, you like those guys too?
Look at grandpa sharing the focus.
By noticing serves, you will help build curiosity and you'll strengthen your relationship.
Step 2, support and encourage.
You can return a child's serve by saying a word of encouragement.
That's right. Very good.
Watch grandpa return this serve by saying thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Even a facial expression can encourage a child.
Orange.
Or emotion,
Hey,
like this
you
mom dancing.
Time. A.
You can also pick up the object that the child is pointing to and bring it closer.
You need help to sit her down?
Things like helping and playing with a child let them know that their thoughts and feelings are heard and understood. Step 3, name it.
Yeah, the puppy. See the windows, the house.
When you return a child's serve by naming what they are seeing, doing, or feeling, you make important language connections in their brain.
He's got bumps all over him, huh?
This brain building happens even before a child can talk or understand your words.
You can name anything, a person, a thing, an action, a feeling, or a combination.
Clean up Clean up, everybody do your shit.
You name what a child is focused on. You help build understanding of the world around us and what to expect from it.
The baby's sitting. Oh, the baby's sitting in the back seat of the car.
You like those? Those are raisins. You have raisins all the time.
Naming also gives a child words to use later and shows that words are important to you.
Step 4, take turns back and forth.
Taking turns helps children learn self-control and how to get along with others.
Waiting is crucial. When you return to serve, give the child a chance to respond.
How are you? I'm good. How are you?
Note that the caregiver waits here for the next serve.
See this toddler navigating a new adventure? Grandpa is waiting patiently, returning serves by asking questions and then waiting to see what happens next.
Yeah.
You want to cover it?
Yeah.
Are you cold?
Yeah.
Oh, put this over your lap like this, okay? Yeah. Do you like that?
Yeah.
Oh.
By waiting, you give the child time to develop ideas and build confidence and independence.
Step 5, practice endings and beginnings. Children signal when they're done or ready to move on to a new activity.
Watch how this child shows it's time to start something new. Letting go of a toy signals an ending. Then picking up a new toy signals the next beginning.
Wanna play with the giraffe?
And you can see, I think too often we take for granted how we actually do these back and forth interactions. And especially if we're thinking about maybe if a child has a disability, their serves might look a little bit different. So we might have a parent who previously was able to easily identify the cues for those serves and those initiations of interactions. And then it may be different in their next child. And so as providers, when we're thinking about these early interactions, it really is critical that we're looking at these in detail and making sure that we're helping to point out, hey, that was wonderful. You really noticed that initiation, that serve, and helping families to really build on those strengths. So some other considerations, are we really watching for those serves? Are we noticing them in all of our environments? Are we helping families to notice those? Are we promoting safe environments where the child feels safe so that they can feel secure enough to be able to actually initiate some of these interactions? Are we helping to coach caregivers on a regular basis so that they can notice these interactions? And then we want to make sure, again, like I said, that we're really thinking through each family and each child individually so that we can notice those early interactions. Some other considerations that I just briefly want to mention today, because these could be a whole different presentation in and of themselves. But as providers in this too, we need to make sure that we are caring for self and that caregivers are also caring for self. Because we often can take on some of the stress or the trauma that perhaps a child has experienced. And so we need to be in a good space so that we can really help to promote interactions and so that we can make sure that the child feels safe where we're at. And so truly be thinking about yourself as well and how you're incorporating means of self-care and rest to be sure that we can continue to do good work. I also encourage areas to be using good, high quality screeners and assessments. And we have some really great work going on in the state of Utah, both in early screening with our Help Me Grow, as well as with different tool development like the Piccolo. So there are a lot of ways that we can actually identify potential needs in these early social emotional skills. And so there's tons of opportunities going on. Mostly I have just included these so that if you have the handout, you can check all of these out. It's one of the wonderful strengths here in the state of Utah, and I know other states too are doing an awful lot in these areas, but please check it out. There's a lot of free trainings that are going on. There's a lot of different screeners available, like I said, for free for families through the Help Me Grow. We've also got this great certification through the state of Utah. And thank you, Ilsa. I saw that you had shared that in the chat. I really appreciate that. And then we also have things like the pyramid model going on, where we have all of this attention to social emotional supports throughout all of our early childhood systems. I also currently have a grant where we're doing additional training as part of our training for teachers and social workers to ensure that we're embedding some of the mental health competencies and understanding, so that we end up with early childhood providers right from the start with some of this additional information. And then there's just tons of other different resources if we want to be diving deeper into how we actually embed some of these standards and curriculum into the work that we do. And then I encourage you today, as you're thinking back on this presentation and after you've done your case study, to maybe think about 2 steps that you could take towards improving practice in your service area or daily work related to this. And it might even just be considering adding a screener, talking about this more, making sure that you have all staff who are trained in trauma and infant mental health, so that we can optimally be identifying and supporting families at the earliest of ages. And then I always like this quote, because great teachers focus not on compliance, but on connections and relationships. And I think this is so true across the lifespan, and no matter what our definition is of teacher, but we need to be creating those early relationships and connections above and beyond anything else. So that is it for me today. I wanted to leave a couple minutes in case there's some questions before I leave you all for your case study portion.
Sondra, that was amazing. Thank you so much. There was just one comment. It's not necessarily a question. It says, I'm finding so much trouble with this during parents working from home whenever the child has to misbehave in order to get noticed.
Yeah, you are so right. And these are the struggles that families are facing, because for a while there, especially during COVID, there weren't the childcare settings. They closed for a bit. Parents were trying to do the best they could to maintain their work and also care for their child. But you're exactly right that then they were missing because they're trying to balance and do their work at the same time as promoting those early interactions. And that's where, you know, especially as providers, it's often multifaceted in what we do. It's helping parents to problem solve how we can make sure that the children are still getting the responsiveness that they need, and the parents are getting the supports they need so that they can still work and provide for those basic survival needs of their family. So it might be connecting them with outside resources, with additional care, helping to find childcare, which is such a shortage right now. But that's a whole different problem for us to tackle. But I love that you're noticing that. So no, I appreciate this. And I wish I could stay for the case study today, because I have a feeling you're going to have such good conversation.
We are. That's the most exciting part of the echoes, because then we get to learn from everybody, right? And have that. So you'll have to join for another one of those. Maria, I do see that you would like to get more information. If you scroll up through the chat, it is in there. Bailey will quickly try to refine that again and share that. And I know you have to run and get to a class, so I'm going to just again thank you so much. And we're going to move on to our case presentation. So please don't everybody jump off, because the case presentation is really where the rubber meets the road, as they say. So thank you so much, Sondra.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Great. Well, today for our case presentation, I am actually going to be the one who is going through it, and I'm going to walk us all through kind of how to do a case presentation, because I know that sometimes that can be scary to do. Bailey, can you see my?
It's in presenter mode.
Okay. How about now?
Yep. Perfect.
Okay. So my name is Janelle Preston. I do work here in our up to 3 early intervention Part C in Northern Utah. I am what they call a autism specialist in our program. So the kiddo that I'm going to be talking to you guys about, he does not have autism. A little bit of background on the case is that he does live with a foster family. He was a captive referral to our program. He's been with this foster family for about 5 months. He does see his bio parents weekly in a supervised visit with the bio parents. The parents are receiving parenting classes. And one of the biggest things is that for the first 2 years of his life, he was rarely out of the crib. And in fact, DCFS, the Division of Children and Family Services, notices that when the child is visiting the bio parents will really have really limited interactions. In fact, there's lots of times that they're all just sitting in that room in quiet silence. They're not doing, like that video showed, that serve and return with it. The primary areas of concern with this is that he is finally starting to warm up to the foster family, but really is oftentimes really slow to warm. He does not know how to play with toys. He's not had a lot of toys in his life, so he's not really sure how to interact with them. He does have difficulty with sleeping. He also has a huge motor delay. So he is finally starting to pull up and cruise along the furniture, but he's not really mobile a lot. He also has some language delays with it. So as you're doing a case presentation, that's kind of what we're just sharing. We're just sharing a little bit of information about the case so that as we're going to move to our community discussions, we have some knowledge and background with that. You can go into a lot more detail about the case, but my questions for today aren't necessarily in regards to the case. They can be, but I wanted to spend some time in our breakout groups thinking about what are some resources that you as a provider share with families when you wonder about infant mental health. What do you look for when thinking about infants with mental health? And are there specific struggles that each of your agency has around the topic? So our breakout groups are going to be JC and Stephanie are our hub members in group 1. And if you guys would really focus on question number 1, which is those resources. Kurt, you're going to be breakout group number 2 that is also going to focus on the resources. Then Jennifer and Susan, you're going to be breakout group number 3. If you will also identify, take question number 2 of things to look for when thinking about mental health with infants. And then Heather and Jordan, you guys are in group number 4, which is just talking about specific struggles in your agency. So as a reminder, if you'll just turn on your cameras, do a brief introduction, make sure that you identify who takes notes in your breakout session, because we will then compile all of those. So if you present a case, you will get a wealth of resources, and then they're stored on our campus page. So Bailey, if you want to go ahead and put us in breakout rooms.
All right, just give me 1 sec to move them around. People have hopped off, so I'm just making sure they're all good. Okay, those are open, so you should see a little button to join and go discuss.
And Kurt, yes. The answer is yes. Take notes.
Bailey, I don't see a button.
Who said that, Kate?
Hey.
Oh,
Yes.
That's because I didn't add you yet. Let me.
Oh.
I think I did them right before you joined, and, and then I
Yeah,
forgot
I'm
to.
sorry. I did
You're
have to
fine.
hop off for a second, but I'm back now. All right.
Okay, well, we will have time to everybody share one idea. So, JC, since I know you have your notes right in front of you, you'll be the first one I call on. So,
Perfect.
what's one idea from your guys' group?
Oh, there's so many good ideas. I'm just going to say we talked about both child side and parent side ideas. The parent side, understanding the parent's own trauma background, reinforcing their good practices, and really supporting their engagement through the coach and consult model are things that we talked about, amongst many other things.
Well, good. We'll be glad to look at all those other things too. Kurt, how about one thing from your group? I don't know who took notes in your group though.
Of course you know who took notes. It was me.
Oh, yes, I do.
I always
You
take
did.
notes in my group.
You took notes.
So we talked about 3 different things. We talked about making sure that we have good assessment and screening to make sure we identify so that we can help the parents understand that there's nothing that they're necessarily doing wrong. We also talked about resources online and other resources, both for crisis time as well as for the long term. And those notes will all be there with the links that we talked about.
Great. Jennifer or Susan, I don't know who took notes or led. Jennifer came unmuted, so.
Yes, I'm up. So what do you look for in mental health in infants? And it was shared what you see, feel, and hear in the environment. Things such as food insecurity, are the curtains closed? Just those environmental impacts as well. And then I think a lot of our focus did speak about supporting the parent and building a relationship with the family.
Awesome. And then Jordan and Heather. Jordan.
We discussed lots of things like how we've seen a positive trend since COVID, but how we would like to keep that trend continuing on that positive scale rather than dipping back down before. Contracting out with specific agencies, with mental health practitioners that are willing to do that if needed, that can maybe take on a dyad of a parent-child or parent-infant if needed, and that more screeners would be helpful, and just even mental health professionals or practitioners that would be willing to do home visits alongside with PI or other types of visits would be great.
Awesome. What great ideas. So Bailey and I always stay out of the breakout groups, but we had our own little breakout group, and one of our ideas was always talking about and reframing the word trauma, because we don't think about the pandemic being a trauma or going out and moving multiple times as a trauma. So just always talking about that. So that we had a great discussion too. Please take a minute, and if you will email your notes to Bailey Campbell at usu.edu. She dropped it in the chat, but we will compile all of those. They will be on our Canvas page if you ever want to go back and listen or review them. If you want to do a case, it's an amazing opportunity, and you get a huge list of resources from everybody on the call. So if you have a case, please consider doing a case presentation for us. Thank you all for attending today's session. Our next one will be in November, November 15th, same time, same place, and we will have another great presentation. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you.